This is Castle 1. Race officer speaking.
Lane line is on boundary up ahead, 35 seconds out.
A bit lower and faster here.
That's a good one, Jimmy.
Still gaining on the lane line there.
We're looking at 10.5, 42. Matching him on the boundary, yeah, copy.
Welcome back, podcast listeners. Thanks for joining us for another month of stories from the very heart of our sport. And this month, we've got another great inside story from a man who must be one of the most diverse talents in sailing. Before we get going, thanks for all your messages. It's so good to hear from you. We love hearing what you're up to, listening to us on those long drives as you head to Sunday morning racing, or tuning into the podcast as you sail your way around the world. Many thanks for your comments. It's so good to hear from you all. And of course, a massive thanks to all of you who have gone over to buymeacoffee.com and contributed to the podcast. It really is appreciated, and I know we say it every month, but producing this podcast is a time-consuming pursuit. Tim and I put a lot of effort into the pod, so many thanks for your support in keeping this podcast free of ads. If you haven't yet done so and you're a regular listener to our endeavours, it's really easy to find. buymeacoffee.com/sailing podcast. It's super quick, super easy, and really is greatly appreciated. So, who have we got lined up for you this month? Well, I've known our guest this month for a very long time. In fact, for a while, as I was building up to the Sydney Olympics, he was my training partner. Obviously not a highlight of his career, but it wasn't long before he was sailing Olympic campaigns of his own. In 2008, he scooped a gold medal in the most competitive of Olympic classes after a dominant performance in the laser class. But after a difficult time at his home games in 2012, he decided it was time for a change. I am, of course, talking about British Olympic star Paul Goodison, a multiple Olympian, most recently on the world stage in the last America's Cup in Auckland as the mainsail trimmer on American Magic. But his talents don't stop there. Paul is very much a sailor's sailor. He is an absolute talent for reading a racecourse, evaluating the conditions and making race-winning decisions. He's the only sailor to have won 3 consecutive world titles in the Moth class, a class that attracts the very biggest names in our sport. But he's also won the incredibly prestigious Star Sailors League. He's a real talent, and this month, he's on the podcast. I hope you enjoy the time I spent with Paul Goodison.
Ben had his medal with him, and all of a sudden you make the connection. This is no longer one of those things you see on the TV that seems so distant. He was like, "What's wrong?" I was like, "I needed to pass you." And he looked back at me and was like, "You only had to ask." I remember coming ashore thinking that the whole world had fallen apart around me.
Paul Goodison, welcome to the podcast, all the way from your home in Lake Garda. Lucky chap. How are you? How's things?
Yeah, really good. Thank you. We've just been evicted from our nice new house because we got the builders in for a couple of days. So I'm momentarily in my wife's small apartment, and we're getting a little settled in here again.
For our listeners who perhaps don't know how amazing Lake Garda is for a small boat sailor, just describe it for us.
It's heaven. Like the sailing's amazing, the wind's amazing in the summer, and the cycling and all the water sports here are just incredible. We came back after the Bermuda Cup, and I was desperate to go and live back in England again. And my wife said it's time for us to go and live in Italy for a while. And we came here for the Moth Worlds, and 2 weeks later we haven't really left since.
It is heaven. I highly recommend it. Well, the last time we saw you, Goody, we were all in Auckland. I mean, that's a full year ago now. Time flies, doesn't it? It doesn't feel that long. What have you been up to since then?
So since Auckland again, we was all about relocating back to Garda and settling in. We finally found a home we liked, and it was really, really quite funny because we arrived home and we had nowhere to go. So we bought a house while we were in quarantine and then without seeing it. And luckily, it was as we expected. So we've settled in here, the little guys at school here, and really just been doing a whole mix of sailing. We took on the 52 this year. I did plenty of moss sailing and some other regattas just to bide my time. But for sure, after Auckland, it's not easy to go without sailing those amazing boats for so long. So it's exciting that it's back on the cards again.
We'll get to all things America's Cup a little bit later, I promise you that. But there's a lot to talk about. Goody, we're going to go way back now to when you were a nipper starting out. And like myself, Paul, you didn't grow up on the south coast of England like many of our peers. You're a Yorkshire lad, north of England, for our foreign listeners, from Rotherham. That's right, isn't it? I mean, not really in the heartland of dinghy sailing.
I think it's probably the furthest point in the UK you can get away from the actual sea. So if you imagine just going north of London for 150 miles and put yourself smack in the middle of the country, it was there's no ocean there. It's all about racing on gravel pits. And I guess for me as a youngster growing up, it wasn't really my first passion. My first passion was football. All I wanted to do was kick the football at the garage door and get better at that, so I could go play Saturday and Sundays. But my parents loved it. My brother loved it, and slowly and steadily, it turned from swimming around in gravel pits to racing in gravel pits. But initially, it was just about going to the sailing club and hanging out with some buddies, going swimming in the lake, capsizing the boats, and just having fun on the water.
That's mad, isn't it? I mean, for our listeners who don't know, Rotherham's sort of level with Manchester, and I guess, right in the middle of the east and the west coast of England, and real, as you say, real soccer, football country, rugby league, I guess too. It's crazy that you became a sailor.
It is a little strange, like you said, just growing up, it was all about sport for me at school, doing as much as I could from rugby, football, cricket, tennis, badminton, literally you name it, I was into it. It's all I wanted to do was play sport, and it was a real passion of mine. And I guess it was when I was 12, 13 years old, I struggled with a knee injury, and it was kind of at that point where I didn't play football for 3 months. I was resting my leg, and after that it was a little harder to get back into the first team, and I started going sailing a bit more, and I guess it opened up a whole new avenue to going traveling and to go sailing with another group of friends. So I kind of ended up doing both, and the more and more I did the sailing, the more and more I enjoyed it. The more places I got to travel, and the more people I got to meet, and that was what it was all about when I was young and growing up sailing.
You managed to escape Rotherham a few weekends in the year.
I laugh. I don't think my brother's left for the last 6 months, maybe even more. He loves it there. Very different to me. I'm always about traveling and getting around as much as I possibly can, seeing new things, doing new stuff.
So you started to get competitive, Goody, at doing the youth circuit in the UK, but you were born the same year as Ben Ainslie. I've done my research. Born almost exactly between Ben and Iain Percy, but also Chris Draper was in there as well, and it was a real golden era of British youth sailing. Bart Simpson was there also. Were you sailing with all those guys as a youngster? What was that like?
It was really strange, I guess, because I think I was a little bit behind all those guys from how long I'd been taking sailing seriously. Like I remember going away. I think I was 17 years old and going to the Youth Europeans for the first time, and people like Ben, Iain, Bart, they'd been around Europe sailing, competing, doing youth worlds, winning medals, and I'd been sailing around in gravel pits, capsizing and swimming around and messing around. And I loved the racing. I loved the traveling. And I remember at one point it kind of dawned on me that if I wanted to keep hanging out with these guys and traveling around, I needed to take my sailing a little bit more serious rather than just having fun. And I think my dad probably saw it the same way as well. He didn't want to pay for me just to go around the world messing around. He obviously wanted me to utilize my talent and to get as good as I could at that sport. And so it all dawned on me, I guess, just before the Atlanta Olympics. I was there busy doing the youth nationals, kicking footballs, playing around and messing around, racing. While there's people like Ben and Iain who were seriously trying to compete for an Olympic spot and Olympic medals. And it kind of dawned on me a little bit there that there was a lot more of a serious side to sport and a lot more of a professional side to sport, rather than it just being fun and a hobby. And it was something that excited me, and that I really wanted to be involved with. And I guess the biggest part of all that was when Ben returned back from Atlanta, having won a silver medal. And I remember we were all at the Mumbles Laser Nationals. I think he came back and it was the last night. We'd all had a little bit too much to drink, and we were in some dodgy establishment in Mumbles drinking too much. And Ben had his medal with him, and I remember for the first time seeing it was the first Olympic medal I'd ever seen and held, and I was like, wow. And all of a sudden you make the connection. This is no longer one of those things you see on the TV that seems so distant and far away. This is actually a guy you know, a guy you've raced against and sailed against, and all of a sudden it became really clear that it's not so far away. It's actually achievable if you have the right work ethic, if you put your mind to it. And it was something I really look back on that and remember as a turning point of me thinking this is definitely something I want to pursue. And if I do want to pursue it, I've got to get a bit more serious.
It was far away, though, in some respects, wasn't it? I can imagine as you got older, it was all about Ben, wasn't it? I mean, could you ever see that you'd get that Olympic chance ever with him? I mean, he was so dominant.
Oh, he was so dominant, but it was also so good for me to be around and to see. I guess coming back from Atlanta, it did seem a million miles away, but after I'd finished university and had a bit more time on my hands to pursue it, I remember going down to New Zealand and spending the winter down there with Bart, with Jim Taylor, and Ben was there as well, taking the sailing a lot more serious. And at that point, I think we going into the final day of the Worlds, it was part of the qualifying. I think I was third and Ben was fourth. And from where I was 12 months before that, it was a different stratosphere. It was unbelievable. I was there challenging, and obviously a little bit inexperienced, and the last day didn't quite go my way. And Ben, after a protest, I think ended up third, and I ended up sixth. So that left Ben with the game spot, and then we went on after that to the Europeans. And again, going into the last day of the Europeans, I was leading going into the last race, and Ben did his prerequisite for the Sydney Games by sailing into the back, and then I kind of clawed my way back. I think I needed to finish fifth to win the Europeans, and my Danish buddy was fifth, and I ended up sixth, and I went over the line. And I think it was one of the rare occasions I slammed my tiller extension. He was like, "What's wrong?" I was like, "Oh, I needed to pass you." And he looked back at me. He's like, "You only had to ask." I was like, "Come on." It was quite a funny moment. But then after that, going and spending all that time with Ben and basically just a big eye opener of what professional sport was all about, and following him up to the Sydney Olympics was a real eye opener. And I think by the end of there, I really thought that I could do this, and it felt very much more real in my eyes.
What I also remember, Paul, of that time is the build up to my own campaign for Sydney. So the 2000 Games, my coach, Mark Littlejohn, got you in as my training partner down at Hayling Island on the south of England. And we paid you £50 a day to slog back and forth, up and down, up and down. I'm guessing you've erased that from your memory.
No, that was some good experience, Shirley. Not only did I learn a little bit about the Europe and some of the rig and sail design, but it also went a good way to helping me enjoy myself through university. I can remember turning up at your house and having a nice lunch cooked, and then going sailing all afternoon, which I did enjoy, and then having some money to go to the pub in the evening with my buddy. So no, it was good times.
I can tell our listeners you were pretty hot in the Europe as well. I wouldn't expect anything else. Goody, let's talk about the Olympic opportunity. Athens 2004, your first game, still pretty young at just 27. I mean, how did that come around?
Again, after Ben moved up to the fin, it was like the door opening wide open for me, because I was ready for the challenge, and some ways I was hoping Ben would stick around because I felt a bit like unfinished business, but in other ways it was like this is mine for the taking, and I really relished the opportunity. I think in the lead up to Athens, medaling at most regattas, I went in to the Athens Games feeling really strong and super confident. But as we all know, things didn't go quite the way I wanted to. I remember the last race. I think the final race was general recalled, which was lucky because I think I was over. So I kind of got a second bite of the cherry. The coach didn't tell me at the time, which I was kind of grateful for Chris for not saying that. But then halfway through the last race, I was in a medal position, and then things didn't quite go the way up the last beat. I remember getting caught in the middle with the Austrian going one side and a Slovenian going the other side, and it slowly slipping away, and that was just devastating. I remember coming ashore thinking that the whole world had fallen apart around me, and I just devastated, feeling like I'd let so many people down that had helped me through the way, and it wasn't really a nice spot to be in. But I remember watching the other guys get the medals, and it was awesome to see yourself, to see Ben, to see Iain, and to see the 470 boys get all the medals, and Nick, and it was a great atmosphere to be around and be involved in. But it was really tough on a personal note to feel the suffering from what I thought was underachieving. And I remember going home from there and not really wanting to, I guess, address the issues, trying to hide away just to go and do other things, party a bit too much, and kind of think, okay, what's next? What can I take on? What can I do next? But I remember it was just after Christmas time. I had a good think and a good chat with my parents about what I wanted to do, and it just felt like if I never tried again, it would be unfinished business, and that was a real motivational point that I decided, look, I want to do this, I can do it, and I want to do it right, and from there on, the next for 3.5 years was completely focused on Beijing and doing the best I could there.
I finished fourth in Atlanta. It's a lonely place, isn't it, Paul? And we've talked a bit about that on the podcast before. It's tough to come back from.
Yeah, no, it is. It's not nice, but I think it's also, you learn so much more from some of your biggest defeats than you do from your biggest victories. And you not only, I think you learn a lot about yourself and what motivates you, and also how to develop yourself, become more analytical, and change the way you do things. It's a great learning opportunity, and I look back now thinking it was probably one of the best experiences I had, just from the things I learned from it, and it's something I take forward into my other sailing, is really trying to learn from when you don't do your best. It's easy to win regattas and be all happy and smiley, but it's the hard stuff to lose and to figure out how to get it right next time. And it's a great motivation for me every time I get knocked down to try and come back stronger and harder. And yeah, it's something I enjoy looking back at now. Not so much when back at the time.
When we spoke to Tom Slingsby about that, I always remember him saying, always feared the person that finished fourth in the games before. And that's so true. And I think about it a lot now when I'm commentating at the Olympics. Well, the next games, of course, for you was Beijing 2008. Tell us what you did differently. What was the learnings from before? And, how different was your approach to the previous 4 years?
I think the biggest difference was goal setting and trying to focus on what you wanted to do and why you wanted to do it. I think running up to Athens, I wanted to win everything. I wanted to stake my claim. I wanted to feel that I was the best, and it was more, I guess, probably trying to reassure myself that I could do it, rather than focusing on the things that mattered, and having a proper plan was the biggest difference for me. And again, I think having the right people around you and having the experience behind you from the previous 4 years helped massively get your head right and have faith in the people that you trusted. And again, it was a great time and a great group of sailors to be around. I remember look back at those Olympics thinking there were some of my best mates who were also doing the best they'd done before, and it was nice to be around, and some special times. I guess the biggest thing I look back at and think about is the special times I spent with Bart, because he's no longer here to share these amazing times that we have sailing these cool boats, and it meant so much to me to have had that time and to be with him, Iain, Ben, and that tight group that we had.
Some incredible talent. I mean, the British team was extraordinary back then. But the regatta for you, Goody, wasn't an easy one, though, was it? I mean, it was light winds, if I remember. And your first few races were a mixed bag. 15th, second, 15th, first. It's tough in the laser fleet to keep ahead, isn't it? I mean, what are your memories of the opening part of that event?
I had no idea what the results were in the first couple of races. It's funny you remind me of those. I guess China was a tricky venue, and I think one of the things I did really good at was I guess getting down to weight super early, because we all thought it was going to be a light regatta. But then also, I think the last 2 weeks I gained 2 kilos going into the Olympics, which was all part of the plan. I was wanting to be getting fitter and stronger, and the kind of defining day I think was the fourth day of racing, when we did 2 or 3 races in strong breeze, and that was the time where I was the most concerned, being small and some of the other guys not losing quite as much weight, and they were the days that I think I had 3 top 10s or maybe even 3 top 5s, and it felt like a solid performance. And it was kind of at that stage I knew that it was easily within reach, and now it was all just down to me just ticking the boxes and going through the process, and it felt pretty good to do well in what was traditionally probably not my strongest conditions. It was one of the strangest out-of-body experiences I think I've ever had. The fact it was a home Olympics in Weymouth, it was something not to be missed. But I could hardly pull the boat up the slipway. I was almost in tears already on day one.
Beijing was the first games, wasn't it, that used the medal race scenario. So the top 10 after fleet racing, sailed in that double points race for the medals. What was the thinking on that change, Paul? And, what did you need going into that medal race?
It was a real strange situation. I think just looking at the medal races in general, I kind of wasn't a big fan of it at the time. I think it was good for TV, but I thought if you were the best guy in the regatta and you were going to win, it was a chance where you could lose the regatta. It struck me as that not the best guy could not win, or had a possibility of not winning, which was really, really worrying. But as it turned out, going into the final race, I was guaranteed a silver medal, and to lose the gold medal, I had to finish last, and the Swedish guy had to finish fourth, Rasmus. So it was pretty comfortable, to say the least. And I remember we had a bit of a match race before the first start, and it was abandoned because not enough wind. And then the second race got away, and I just kept the Swedish guy at bay. It didn't feel nice at the time, but the wind was so light, tricky, and so much tide. I was just so concerned that anything could happen, especially with the yellow flags and the jury, and I didn't want to have anything taken out of my hands and risk winning that obviously had worked so hard for the 4 years. But it was a bit bittersweet. I really felt for Rasmus, who then missed out on the medal, and it took 4 years for that to be righted when he got to stand on the podium in London, which felt pretty rewarding for me, and and it helped me deal with the 4 years earlier. But thinking back, like, you cross the line, and it's just an immense relief that all that time, effort that you've put in has not gone to waste, and it's more of a thank goodness I didn't mess that up sort of feeling, rather than elation and being celebrating. But it felt great.
Then, of course, the medal ceremony, standing on that top step with all that effort behind you. I mean, how was that? What were you thinking, hearing the anthem, the gold medal, finally yours, Paul?
It was one of the strangest out-of-body experiences I think I've ever had. I remember jumping up there, throwing my hands in the air, and having the medal placed around my neck. And then you always think you're a bit bigger than crying when you stand up there, but it, it happens to the best of us. And I remember just looking into the crowd, and everything seemed to go hazy. And just at the back of the crowd, I saw my mum, who'd been out there the whole time watching, and I tried to look everywhere else, but everything else was blurry. And my mum was just crystal clear, and she was sobbing her eyes out. And in the end, I was just sobbing my eyes out with my hand on my chest, trying to suck in the air as much as I could. But it was an amazing feeling, and something that I'll never forget.
Oh, you're making me cry, Paul. Thinking about the moment with your mum. That's a special moment. An amazing moment for her too. Incredible.
And it was
in our sport though, Goody, none of us are earning millions winning medals, are we? But what does winning at the Games do for the career? I mean, did winning that medal open doors for you at all?
I think for sure you have to prove yourself at Olympic level to want to progress in the sport. And obviously the next step or the biggest thing in professional sailing is the America's Cup. It's the coolest boats, it's the fastest boats, it's the biggest teams, the most technology, and it's something that you desperately want to be involved in and be a part of it. And I'm sure that winning there in Beijing in the lasers was a good stepping stone for me to be involved with Artemis Racing 4 years later. I look at that, and I think the other part is just my introduction to moth sailing, and I think I have Adam May to thank for that. I remember turning up at Artemis just before the San Francisco Cup, and the guys are out training, and Adam says, "You've got to have a go in this." And unfortunately for me, I'd previously just bought a A-class catamaran. And Adam's like, "You don't want one of those?" I was like, "Oh, I only got one 2 months ago." And I remember we were going sailing just in the inner harbour at Alameda, and within about half an hour, I came in just beaming ear to ear, and I ordered one that evening. And and I think the moth sailing and the passion I had for that also did a great job of giving me a stepping stone into the foiling world and the America's Cup.
We're going to talk a lot more about that. But I want to stay with the Games for a little while longer. After Beijing, obviously, attention turned to London 2012. I mean, a massive opportunity for any British athlete. A home Games is a rarity for most. So was that then a given, Paul, that you'd be back to defend your Olympic title for London?
It was a real tricky one. Like you just achieved pretty much everything you ever wanted to do in the sport, and a little bit you wanted to enjoy it and branch out. I think the laser's a tricky one. It's so one-dimensional, and so I guess untechnical compared to all the other sailing. It's a very special class where the racing is everything, and I guess that's the reason why I carried on and came back. I think had it not been London, then there's the potential that I would have not been racing at the next Olympics. But the fact it was a home Olympics in Weymouth, where I had a house, it was something not to be missed, and something that I was super excited by, but also a little bit daunted by spending the next 4 years doing the same old stuff. And I guess the hardest thing for me was that I wanted to go and I wanted to do other sailing. And every time I come back to the laser, it's felt like such a battle to get back to your previous best, because the learning curve was so shallow. But it was something that I guess I needed to address and to change. And I played around with different coaches. I had a great coach in Chris Gowers that I'd spent most of my career with. And then I had an Australian come and join me for the last 18 months, Arthur Brett, who was a real inspiration. And he changed this mindset from me going through the process and just trying to get to my previous best by opening my eyes to new techniques, to new ways of thinking. And he made the last 12 months so much more exciting and
laser sailors.
And a great experience.
It's a strange kind of boat, isn't it? I mean, I love to sail boats that are technical, where you can stack the odds. But in a laser, you are really looking for the tiniest of differences. Talk to us, about the boat, and I guess that love-hate relationship with it.
Yeah, like you said, it's very straightforward, and the smallest differences make the difference. And it's a lot about the time, it's a lot about the motivation, and it's a lot about being just a perfectionist in every small area because you have so little to make a difference. And looking back, the reason why I love the laser so much is because of the racing. In the end, the training was hard. It was a bit of a bind. It took a lot of stress on your body as I 15 years in, I think it was. But the racing still excites me now to sail these one design classes, especially. There's nothing more one design than the laser, and it's such an awesome class for me to be out there with 70, 80 boats at the Worlds and being so close, and the tiny margins of difference making the difference between standing on the podium and not on the podium, and that's what I loved about the laser. Now maybe a bit old for that, and I like you said, trying to stack the odds in your in your favor if you can be a little faster, and the technical side is something that excites me more and more now.
I can remember we did a lot of media around the British team for Weymouth for the London 2012 Games. And there was a lot of buzz about Ben, of course. Nick Dempsey had promised his little boy an Olympic medal. There was Ian and Bart, a young Hannah Mills, charging headfirst into her first Games with Saskia Clark. But there was a sense with you, Paul, that things weren't necessarily quite right. I mean, physically, you weren't in the best shape. I can't quite remember, the ins and outs of it all, but how did you feel as it all kicked off and got underway?
I think when it came into the Games with 2 weeks out, I felt fantastic. I was in probably some of the best shape I'd ever been in. The sailing and all the training was going really well. And it was I guess the thing that I hadn't quite managed well enough was that last 10, 15 days run into the start of the Olympics. It's the sort of time where you're hitting a lot of PBs in the gym, and you're there in there with Ben, Ian, Bart, and you're all still quite competitive. And I can remember we had some exercises on the hiking bench where you're hanging weights above your head and swinging around. And I can recall where, because I was feeling so good, I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and I could feel that I'd gone too hard. And it was kind of, oh shit, I've messed up here. So the next, I guess, 5 or 6 days were about trying to get myself right and backing off from everything. So going in was probably not the best preparation. I felt like I was trying to look after myself rather than trying to push myself as hard as I possibly could. And I remember coming in from the first day of sailing, I think it was the first beat of the second race, bouncing a little bit too hard, and I could feel that my back had gone. And I can remember I could hardly pull the boat up the slipway. I was almost in tears already on day one, and from then it was a real battle, just I guess mentally as well as physically. When you're taking painkillers, your mind's probably not where it needs to be, and it really felt like such a massive missed opportunity. But we battled through till the end, and it didn't finish how I wanted to. But it was again great to be part of the bigger team and all the success of everybody else. But it was obviously very, very frustrating and I guess sad from not achieving what you wanted to achieve.
Oh, it's so hard, Goody, isn't it? Injury. We don't often have that much injury in dinghy sailing, but it's brutal, difficult.
Yeah, I guess that was the sign that I was probably ready to move on and do something a little bit less less physical.
Australians Tom Slingsby was also on a bit of a charge in Weymouth, wasn't he? I mean, what was the mood in the fleet like with Slingsby, who was on form? I mean, there was rumours, wasn't there, a bit of a niggle between the two of you. Certainly you were both pitched as favourites to take gold.
Yeah, no, we had our ups and downs between myself and Tom. It was a battle in the lead up to Beijing. He was always ever so dominant in the strong winds and a fantastic sailor. And running into London, dominated in the stronger winds, but he obviously had weaknesses in the other areas, and they were sort of things that we were hoping to capitalize on. But going in, he sailed fantastic. He didn't really put a foot wrong, and deservedly came away with a gold. So it was a little tough because I didn't feel like I put up a fight, but it was too far away from me after the first day, unfortunately.
Well, as you say, that was that seventh overall, your last Olympic regatta, Goody. I mean, how much did it feel like, you turned your back on Olympic sailing? I mean, was that your choice, or did you miss it? What was that feeling like leaving the Olympic world?
It was a little strange because a couple of months before the games, I'd already had chats with Bart about moving into the Star, and about Iain was planning on moving away and doing other things, and kind of in my mind that the next step was still to continue doing some Olympic sailing in the Star with something a little bit more technical, that would excite me and change it up a little bit. But unfortunately that went away. So I think it was an easy decision. I was never going to be big enough for a fin, and I'd paid my dues in the laser, so to speak. I think I'd had a good innings, and I was ready to move on to new things.
Well, move on you did, Goody. You've mentioned getting into the Moth already, but I wanted to talk specifically about your prolific record in the Moth class. Tell us again, Paul, how that really got going and what it was that first drew you into Moth sailing.
I think, as we spoke about earlier, the introduction was Adam May when I was at the Artemis base saying, "Come on, give this a go," and it was almost like, wow, you can go so fast with so little effort. Something that was almost unheard of in the laser. You had to work so hard to go so slow. It was just eye opening, and I love the technical side from being, I guess, subdued for so long in the laser with nothing to play around with, nothing to experiment with, to then literally you can try whatever you want whenever you want. And I remember being in Weymouth. I spent a lot of time sailing with Chris Draper at the time, Simon Hiscox, and a whole bunch of Weymouth guys that it was so into this moth sailing, when we called it Foil Town, and we'd be out there almost every hour that we could, sailing around in our moth, beating the crap out of each other. It was awesome. And then we'd go back to Simon Hiscox and have a cup of tea and discuss who was best, and we'd all have our own opinions that we were better than each other, and it just made for great entertainment and great banter. And it was like my second love for sailing again. It was something that I just could not get enough of. I think I tried the windsurfing and the kite surfing, but this was my real passion again, and something that I just loved being involved with.
How easy a transition is it from the traditional laser or normal kind of dinghy to sailing a foiling moth? I mean, obviously you don't have to jump straight to the moth. There's entry level options, but even so, foiling in a one-person rocket ship, how achievable is that for someone thinking about getting into it?
I think now it's a lot more achievable than it was back then. The technology, the advancements in the boats and the control systems is night and day better than it was back then. I remember back then pieces falling off and you'd be swimming around trying to piece the thing back together and get in, and you'd have the wrong foil or the wrong mast. And now it seems like the equipment has progressed so much in the last 5 or 6 years that so many of the boats are way more accessible to the standard, I guess, club sailor to come in and give it a go and get some real thrill and enjoyment from what I think is probably the coolest, cheapest small boat out there when you compare it to the other foiling boats that go considerably faster.
It's not that cheap, Goody.
I can remember at the time.
If you're sailing around in your laser.
No, I can remember at the time. I think my moth cost maybe 3 times more than my car at the time when we first started moth. In fact, even now, I had a couple of moths in the garage the other day, and my wife was asking me why the car's parked outside, and I had to remind her that one of the boats was probably worth more than both of the cars that were outside. So yeah, no, it it is an expensive hobby, but it's something that's just amazing, and everybody gets carried away and probably spends more than they should do on these little toys.
You can tell your wife it's been worth the investment. And we'll get onto the cup a little later. But I can remember filming in Bermuda a lot in the build up to the 2017 Cup. And whenever we came to Artemis to see Iain Percy, you were nowhere to be seen, always out on the Moth, foiling around the Great Sound. Is that where you put all your hours in?
That was one of the big jumps, I guess, for me. I guess once I first started, I think my first Moth Worlds were in Hayling Island, and Nathan turned up and gave us all an absolute kicking. I remember I was blaming on not having the right size foil, this, that, and the other. There's 100 excuses, but then I'd go and spend a lot more time with him and Goobs and Francesco Bruni, and a big part of the Artemis training was the small boats. We identified early on that we had starting issues, and at that point we didn't have simulation and ways we could replicate a lot of the practice. So it was all about going out in the small boats and beating each other up. And I wanted to prove myself, and every spare bit of time I had, I wanted to be out there getting better and better. And that's I was super motivated, and that was my way, I guess, of trying to prove to everybody that I was good enough to be there, and I wanted to be doing it.
Well, we always knew where to find you. That was for sure. Are you that kind of sailor, Paul, that just puts in more hours than anyone else?
I think when you enjoy something and you want to get better at it, it's easy just to get carried away and put in every hour that you can. And I guess that's, for me, that's how a lot of the guys I look up to in sailing, you see how Ben achieves it. I could see how yourself achieve that sort of thing. You work harder than everybody else around, and there's so many people with talent. It's the guys who work hardest that win, and that's, I guess, my mindset, that if I want to get better, I need to work harder at it and spend more time doing it. And that was a big part of it at Artemis. We only had I especially had limited amount of time I could be sailing the catamarans, because I was on the second boat most of the time, and if only one boat sailed, I'd get very limited amount of time sailing it. And my way of trying to catch up and keep up was spending the extra hours out moth sailing and getting better at that.
I've been to a few Moth events. I mean, your first Moth Worlds was won in 2016, Japan. Many of the big names were absent. I guess they were cup sailing, but that's where you won your first Moth title.
Yeah, no, that was basically we were between, I think, boats in Artemis, and I basically begged Iain. I said, look, could I have 2 weeks off work to go and do this? This is something I desperately need to go and do. I think Goobs and Nathan were away 49er sailing at the time, and I'd been basically granted 2 weeks leave to go and do the Moth World. So we had an amazing time in Japan, and to win the Worlds there was super cool. It was not only the Moth class is different to any of the other classes. It's not just about the racing. It's like a big family that travels around the world. Everybody helps each other out, and it's super cool to be involved with. And to win was obviously what I wanted to do, but more just the experience and being there with a bunch of amazing friends and people, and to share that time felt very special. It was also nice to get off 7 till 7 at the Artemis base for 2 weeks.
You put the hours in at the Cup, that's for sure. Well, by 2017, though, Paul, the Moth Worlds were back to a full roster. The talent at a big Moth event is frightening. And that year it was no exception. Was it Slingsby, Outeridge, Bruni, Pete Burling, Gibbs Jensen? I mean, I could go on. Olympic medalists, Cup winners. The Moth Worlds attracts so many big names. Tell us how that regatta went down.
That was one of the most special sailing regattas, I think, that's ever been, especially for me. I think regardless of winning, losing, it was such a special time that it was straight after the Bermuda Cup. Everybody was there, everybody from all the different teams, the top guys were there. And I just remember going into that again, it's one of those things I wanted to prove that I was good enough to be doing the roles I wanted to be doing on the America's Cup. I didn't want to be in the second boat. I wanted to be in the first boat, and it was the chance I had to race against these guys one-on-one in the same boats on the same race course, and it was something I was super motivated by, and something I desperately wanted to dominate. And I went into that event. I think the Nationals was a week before, where I won most of the races and felt super confident. And then going into the actual Worlds, everything went as well as could be expected, and winning with 2 races to spare was very, very special.
How important was that victory for you, Paul?
For me, on a personal level, I think it was massive. I wanted to prove to myself that I could beat all these other guys, and that was, I guess, my only opportunity to show and to do that. But again, it was also just an amazing time to be around so many friends. The regatta was important, but we'd still be going to the pub every night and having a beer, or we'd still be hanging out and going to dinners together. And no matter who you were racing against, you were friends. And that, again, what's so special about the Moth.
Well, you won a 3rd Moth Worlds in Bermuda, 3 on the bounce. In any class, that's pretty good going. But in the Moth class, that's pretty impressive, Paul. I mean, do you think that changed people's perception of you as a class act sailor?
I'm hoping that happened in Garda, but maybe it did. It wasn't quite as strong as the fleet had been in the Garda Worlds, but again, it was another tough regatta and nice to win it. And again, that one I was a little bit more relaxed in Bermuda. It was more like going back to Bermuda. I was there with my wife, and just it was like an amazing holiday back in paradise again, and just it was just special, good special times.
Why do you think you were so good in the Moth class?
Again, I think it's one of those things that the harder you work at, the better you get. And it's if you are into it and you want to win, you work harder than everybody else. But it's also very technical. I think you need to also be very good at identifying what makes a boat go faster and working on the key details, because everybody at that point was pretty much using the same platform. And for me, it was all about developing the sails and the rigs and spending more time and getting comfortable about where the crossovers were and where you needed to invest your time and effort. And I think that's something that I did quite well in those 3 Moth Worlds. I identified, I think, the right things to focus on and did a little bit better job than the other guys as well as sailing the boat well.
Paul Goodison, everyone. I've never heard that story about the injury in the gym just before 2012. That's terrible timing. But what an approach to competition. Well, part 2, we hear how Paul's career continued to grow as he moved into the big leagues with a step up to the world of the America's Cup. And if you're an American Magic fan, he's also got a little bit of news for us. Of course, a huge thanks to Paul for his time. Paul, thank you for sitting down with us to record the pod. And of course, to Tim at Vertigo Films for putting the podcast together each month. And of course, to you for tuning in. Thanks for joining us this month. If you like what you're hearing and you're loving the ad-free interviews we bring you each month, then please do take the time to visit buymeacoffee.com/sailing podcast and support the podcast. It's quick and easy. Leave us a message. It's lovely to have your support. Thank you. Until next time, thank you so much for listening. Have fun on the water and sail safe, everyone.
This is Castle 1. Race officer speaking.
Lane is on boundary up ahead, 35 seconds out.
A bit lower and faster here.
Oh, that's a good one, Jimmy.
Still gaining on the lane line there.
We're looking at 10-5 and 42. Matching him on the boundary, yeah. Copy.
This is Castle 1 standing by. Out.